a lot of challenges in life, isn't there? And so we looked at loneliness and fear and anger and worry, bitterness, all of these kind of emotions that we have. And we saw in the very beginning, when God created everything, Adam and Eve never experienced any of that stuff. It wasn't until later when Satan appeared on the scene and everything went pear-shaped. So today we're going to look at loneliness. And I think it's a very prominent subject and affects most of us at some point in time, and maybe right now it's affecting some people. But just the other night I was lying on the sofa with Fumi. We were getting ready to cuddle up and watch a film, and so I was feeling a bit on the lonely side. You know, sometimes you feel a bit lonely, you want a bit of a hug. So I remember going over and I was about to give her a cuddle, and she said, "Be careful, I'm holding a tea." I said, "Well, don't worry about it. I'm holding on to you. That means we're both holding on to letters of the alphabet." Think about it, you'll get that. But the point of the story is that we are surrounded by people who could do with a hug. Everywhere, people could do with a hug. And one of life's greatest pains is the pain of loneliness. And it's a pain that is visited, or is visiting, or will visit all of us at some point in our lives. And so the question we're going to try and answer today is this: when loneliness comes into our life, are we going to see it as a time of groaning or a time of growing? And I want to begin, like I said, that God never intended for us to experience loneliness. In Genesis, God created the heavens and the earth, and he said it was good. And you remember Adam, when he was created, he had an incredible relationship with all the animals, and had an incredible relationship with God. But even at that, God said it's not good for man to be alone. And so God performed the first anesthesia and put Adam to sleep, if you remember. And he created Eve from Adam, from his side, meaning that they're equal. One is not more important than the other. They're equal. And so she became his wife. Now the thing is, we all need time alone with God. We need to have our own time with God. But we weren't created to live a life in isolation from other people. We're created to have enriching relationships with people around us. But the curse of loneliness only exists because sin entered God's creation, and as a result it distorted God's world. And it became a place that God never intended it to be. And so not only has sin corrupted our ability to have a relationship with God, sin has corrupted our ability to have a relationship with each other. That's why when you look in the world today, there's so much breakdown and wars and all sorts of things going on. And so that as a result of all of that, the world is full of something that God said is not good. Now, loneliness is not the same thing as being alone. As everyone in this room could tell you, you could be surrounded by thousands of people and yet still be lonely. You could be in this room right now, surrounded by people, and yet still feel lonely. Now, what is loneliness? Well, it's the kid who's at school, who stands up for God, and everybody else doesn't want anything to know, don't want anything to do with you. It's the girl who's working for the NHS, and she's moved away from home, and she doesn't know anybody. It's the single mum or single person who's tired of somebody saying, "You're not married yet," as if there's something wrong with being single. It's the kid who's mindlessly watching television, trying to block out the screams from the parents in the bedroom. It's the person in the nursing home who's hoping that somebody, anybody, would just come by and visit today. It's the person who's just left the cemetery, is now preparing supper for one. In Genesis chapter 16, like we just read a moment ago, we read about a couple named Abram and Sarai, later to become Abraham and Sarah. And they moved from a place called Canaan, because God had promised them, "I want you to go there, and your descendants are going to be as numerous as the sand. There's going to be a great people. And so they lived there for 10 years, but still they never had any children. And so Sarai had determined that, I'm too old to have children now. I'm way past the biological age of having children. And she comes up with this great idea to help God out, if you wish. And so she said to her husband, Abram, listen, I've got a young maiden named Hagar. She's the slave girl we picked up in Egypt. What I want you to do, we can have children through her. And so I want you to marry her, she can be your wife, and I'll raise children through her. And so Abram agreed with all this, and Hagar became his wife. They slept together, and she became pregnant. And right away, from that moment, there's tension arises between Hagar and Sarai. And that tension is very, very evident within the scriptures. And so Sarai starts to complain to Abram about it. And notice this, your slave is in your hand, Abraham said. Do with her whatever you think best. Then Sarai mistreated Hagar, so she fled from her. And so it's clear that Hagar's life was becoming unbearable, hence why she fled away from Sarai. But when she did, Hagar's life changed dramatically. She's gone from having somewhere to live to becoming homeless. She had the protection of a large family and support from them, and now she's vulnerable. She's out here on her own and pregnant. And if there was ever a woman in the Bible who understands loneliness, I would think it would be Hagar. She would get that. And there are many people right now, not just single mums, who are finding it difficult to deal with loneliness through no fault of their own. Now life, as you know, is full of transitions, and they're going to bring loneliness. Some of them we expect. You go to a new school, you don't know anybody. Or you've just had a baby, and you're stuck at home for months at a time all on your own. Or maybe you've just said goodbye to your last child, and you're going through what they call empty nest. But there are things that could happen suddenly that you don't know are coming that could cause loneliness. It could be a divorce, and suddenly you're all by yourself. It could be a sudden illness, and now your life is dramatically changed by a new handicap. Or I don't know of adjustment that's harder to make than losing your husband or your wife. You see, a lot of us in this room who are married, whether we like it or not, we're going to say goodbye to a mate, or they're going to say goodbye to us. And we're going to have to spend time learning how to adjust to life without them. And maybe right now some of you are in the middle of a painful transition, but possibly knowing that transitions are a part of life, that may help a little bit. There's another cause of loneliness, and it's separation. It comes when you're simply unable to be with the people you love. Maybe you've had to move out of your parents' home because you've got a job in another part of the country. Or maybe your daughter is on the other side of the world with their babies because her husband has got a job over there. Or maybe your father is out of the house 3 or 4 nights a week and you miss him, but you can't help it. It's part of his job. But do you know when loneliness is the most painful? I think it's more painful when it's created by a broken promise. When that man is promised till death us do part, and he walks into the house one day and he says, I'm moving out. And you find out that he's with a girl at work half his age and they're in love. Or maybe your mum and dad say, yeah, we'll be there for the school activity. We'll be there. But something always happens. They're always too busy and they never seem to make it. I don't think loneliness is ever harder when it's created by a broken promise. Do you remember Job, for example, in the book of Job? He says, my intimate friends detest me. Those I love have turned against me. Now, Job is a book in the Bible. He's a character. And he went through some of the most horrendous things that anybody could ever imagine. In poor health, he lost his finances, he lost his family, he lost his friends. And his friends who did come, what did they do? They just mocked him. Now that's loneliness. And loneliness can be so painful that people will even turn to anything to cope with it. Now, speaking from experience, why do people try alcohol? Well, why do you think pubs are so popular? Do you think people go to pubs to drink? Of course not. They can drink in their home. People go to pubs to drink because they'll find somebody there to talk to. Some people will try busyness. Why do you think some people become workaholics? They're trying to fill up their lives with something because it hurts them too much when they're by themselves, and then they realise there's nothing for them really to look forward to. And I believe that one of the reasons that immorality is so rampant in our world today is because people are desperate to be connected to somebody. They'll pay almost any price to get it. You know, you talk about Facebook. I've got 500 followers. No, you haven't. You've got 500 acquaintances. I don't know how many followers I've got on Facebook. Do I know them all? No. Real friends, you can count on one hand. Isn't that true? Real friends. But what I'm saying is this. Before you go try running in anywhere else to deal with your loneliness, try turning to God. Because God understands loneliness. I honestly believe there's never been a more lonely moment in the life of Jesus when he hung on that cross and he's been deserted by his friends. Jesus understands what it's like, absolutely, to be alone. But not only does he understand, he actually genuinely cares. Listen to the psalmist. The Lord is close to the broken-hearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. You see, you're never closer to God than when you're hurting. And so when we go back to our text that we had earlier from Genesis 6, 7 through to 12, what we see here is when Hagar found herself sheltering near a spring in the desert, she's thinking that she's on her own, and she's thinking that nobody cares, and then an angel appears. And she finds out she's pregnant. The angel of the Lord assures her that she and her son are going to be absolutely fine. God is going to bless them in the future. But my point is this, that God doesn't just give his attention to the Sarahs of this world. He gives attention to the Hagars as well. You see, God saw Hagar. Remember, she's Egyptian. She's not even a Jew. She's not even one of God's people. Yeah? But God saw Hagar when nobody else was looking for her. And she learned that the God of Abraham, the God of Syria, actually cared about her as well. And I don't think she knew that. I don't think she thought that anybody cared about her. I don't think she thought that anybody cared about a single mum who's out in the middle of the desert. But she's wrong. But God does. And when she called God El Roy, is the Hebrew word there, the God who sees me, what she's saying is, you're the God that knows what's going on in my life. I didn't think anybody knew what I was going through. I didn't think anybody cared. But now I know that God knows what my life is like. And if there's anything I could say to anybody who's feeling a bit on the lonely side today or dealing with loneliness, you need to understand this. God knows and God cares. You may be feeling lonely today, and you may not have an ideal situation today, but you've got an ideal God. You've got a God who sees. He sees your loneliness. He sees how loneliness can happen even through no fault of your own. Now think about Hagar again. Hagar's life wasn't fair. She didn't ask to be married to Abraham. This is an arranged wedding that we read about here. Nobody asked her opinion about it. It wasn't fair that she would get kicked out of the family home and left on her own. It's not fair that she's pregnant with nowhere to go. And some of you understand that. You understand that because life for you isn't fair. Maybe you planned to retire and spend 50, 70 years with your husband, and he gets cancer and now he's gone. That's not fair. Or maybe she stood before you and your family and God and said, till death us do part. And then she decides to get up and move out and move in with somebody else. That's not right. You see, I don't pretend for one moment to really understand how much that hurts. But I do know that the healing begins with the recognition that El Roy sees it all. He sees it all. Record my lament. List my tears on your scroll. Are they not on your record? See, God has noticed your situation, and he's kept a record of every single tear that you've cried. And listen, I understand that loneliness is difficult. I understand, especially mums, that you have those nights when you're lying in bed and you're cuddling up your pillow and you're pouring your eyes out. I understand those things. And you think, well, nobody sees me, nobody knows, nobody cares. But the thing is, even though you can't see God, he can see you. And it's important for you to remember that God can see you. You may not feel significant to anybody, but you're very significant to God. Very significant. And so did you know that a Christian can be lonely, but it's absolutely impossible for a Christian to be alone? Did you know that? You see, when you're hurting and you're struggling with loneliness, the devil wants to whisper in your ear that, God has abandoned you. But that lie couldn't be further from the truth. Because you may lose your friends. You may lose some family members. But never lose your grip on the truth. And the truth is this. God has said, I will never abandon you. God said, I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. You see, the part of our problem we're living in the world today is we're living in a world that's full of depersonalization. Most of the time when I speak to somebody on the telephone, I'm just a number. I'm just or I speak to a recorded voice. Or maybe I'm a computer reader. But the Bible says that's not the way it is in heaven. God, believe it or not, is so ultimately aware of me. He knows how many hairs I've got left on my head. Now, thankfully, I'm doing God a favour because there's not a lot left to count. But he knows. That's how intimately aware of me he is. I heard a story about a young boy who was practicing saying the Lord's Prayer. And he said, Our Father who art in heaven, how did you know my name? You see, God is absolutely aware of everything you are going through. He knows you intimately. Whether you're his child or not, he knows. And so you're not alone. You may feel lonely, but you're not alone. And if you're struggling with loneliness, I want to encourage you to pray about it. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their prayer. You see, Hagar knew that God not only sees what's going on in her life, but God also hears what's going on in her life. That's why when she named her son Ishmael, the name Ishmael means God hears me. And you can be sure that God hears your prayers. If you're struggling with loneliness, I want you to pray about it, and I want to encourage you to focus on somebody else's needs with love. You see, when you're lonely, you can just block it all up inside and end up hurting yourself. Or you can rechannel that love and pour it out on somebody else who needs it. You see, there's a sense in which the Bible says that loneliness is a choice. Because there's a world full of people out there who need to be loved. There's a whole bunch of people out there who could do with a hug, if you wish. And what you can do when you're lonely is say, God, show me somebody who needs a hug today, and I'll go and give it to them. I believe the cure for loneliness is receiving and releasing the love of Christ. So what I want to do, just for finish, we've not done this for a long, long time, if ever. I think we've done it once. What I'd like you to do this. I'd like you to stand up. And I'd like you to turn to the person next to you and give them a hug and say, God wants you to have this. Yeah? Because some of you look like you could do with a hug this morning. My arms are not big enough to go around everybody. So if you want to stand and give somebody a hug, that would be great.
I need to
The Lord, I'll do a Sheila hug.
Mine's a proper hug. I get Sheila hug.